Welcome everybody to the African Doctoral Academy Masterclass in collaboration with Peri Peri U. My name is Natalie Kavalik. I'm the Program Manager at the African Doctoral Academy, and I'm joined by our guest speaker, Dr. Sonja Strydom. Dr. Strydom is a scholar in the field of higher education and digital technology. As Deputy Director at the Center for Learning Technologies and a Research Fellow at the Center for Higher and Adult Education at Stellenbosch University, she has established herself in the interrelated fields of academic development, curriculum renewal, and digital technology. She holds a PhD in higher education and a Doctorate of Literature and Philosophy in psychology. Dr. Strydom will be speaking on the topic of mapping academic mindsets in the age of generative AI. We will be opening the floor to questions after the presentation. Please feel free to ask your questions in the chat or Q&A section, and my colleagues Luther and Francois will be assisting. Just a reminder to everybody who is joining the session, it is being recorded and it will be made available on our YouTube channel afterwards. The links can also be found on our website. So welcome everybody. I will now hand over the platform to our presenter. Welcome.
Thank you, Natalie. Thank you so much, and colleagues from our side also a warm welcome here from Stellenbosch and Western Cape. And thank you for your time and for your interest in this topic this afternoon. Colleagues, maybe to get started, just to give you a bit of a background on our endeavour this afternoon. Perhaps it's not a typical type of workshop or masterclass on Gen AI as we are normally used to. This is not a workshop or masterclass focusing specifically on Gen AI tools, or looking at the different affordances of these tools or how we can use it in research practices, nor is it an opportunity to actually look at things such as academic integrity, assessment practices, and so forth. The purpose for this afternoon is actually to reflect and to turn around and to look into ourselves, our own actions, our own behaviors, and to decide on how these actions actually have an impact on the way in which we engage with these tools on a daily basis. And in our context, obviously in terms of our work and also our research environment. So for us to get started, you'll see there on the slide, what I'm sharing with you is just maybe a bit of a background on how I came about in conceptualizing this masterclass this afternoon. I made extensively use of some of the chatbots, or I call them buddies. It's a bit of a question mark behind the choice of words, I guess. I looked specifically, I made use of Claude, Perplexity, ChatGPT, and to a lesser extent with the aid of Pi as well. And this was to help me to actually conceptualize my ideas around this topic this afternoon. I also engaged with specifically academic articles, and you'll see on the left-hand side of the slide that there are a number of tools that I made use of. Many of these tools are very useful and sensible, specifically also when we engage with these tools and that we are able to ask them some questions. And then, of course, last but not least, of course, at the bottom as well, I made use of further verification and validation by making use of some academic databases to my disposal as well. So, colleague, for us to get started, maybe the first thing is I would like to start off with a case study that we have here on this slide. And I'm going to ask each person here in our session today to read with me the case study, and then to reflect on the question that I have on the right-hand side of the slide. And this will be our starter activity for this afternoon. The case study is as follows. Prof. Madiba leads a cross-disciplinary research methods course at her university. So she's a lecturer. When she proposed incorporating Gen AI tools for data analysis and literature review, it sparked diverse reactions. Her teaching assistants, for instance, immediately began exploring innovative assessment designs, while senior faculty insisted on developing strict usage protocols. Some colleagues saw an opportunity to enhance traditional research methods, while others actually envisioned completely new approaches to methodology. And during this transition, Prof. Madiba ensured that students from all technical backgrounds could access and also learn from these tools effectively. So colleagues, the question that I have on the right-hand side is, in the spectrum between radical technological embrace on the one hand and cautious preservation of traditional methods on the other hand, where would you position yourself within this scenario? So that's the first question. Just looking at a plain continuum and thinking of this case study, who would you probably be in terms of the responses to Prof. Madiba's suggestions? And then the follow-up question is actually, what personal or professional experiences do you think actually shaped that positioning of yours? So I'm just going to ask you just to maybe just for a minute or two, just to think about the scenario itself. And if you are willing to, it will be fantastic if in the chat, if maybe just in one or two sentences, if you could share with us your positioning, how would you see yourself? Do you think you're somebody that will embrace these technological changes as displayed in the case study? Or are you more cautious in terms of these things that are happening specifically in this case study? And if you want to, you don't have to share that second part, but what are the personal or the professional experiences that started to shape that positioning in some form or another? So I'm just going to give you a minute or two just to think about that. And then I'm going to ask my colleagues, Luther or Francois, if there's anybody in the chat. I can't see the chat at the moment. If there's somebody that's willing to share that, that will be absolutely fantastic.
Right. So Sonja, the person who wants to speak, I don't know if you want to take that now.
Yeah, that's 100% as well. Let's quickly have a chat. Brilliant.
All right. Sibaya, you are welcome to unmute yourself.
What? Still waiting, can't be on my side.
There you go.
No, I was reading that they enabled the muting. Just a note that we can't use the chat because it's not. Now it's available. Okay, I don't know. People can use it now, but I couldn't edit, so I wanted to post it. But mine is actually more towards Professor Madiba's side, but also with caution on, the spectrum of which you should use it. And I also do think that it should be used taking into account what foundations those people have to use it. And in my case, I'm in my thesis writing stage, and a lot of the wasting, like the time waste, that's why you included such AI there. The wasted time in finding relevant documents, and even with illicit. And I like that there are repeating ones because you are able to see how they interpret content differently, where you ask the same question. And it also gives you a sense of understanding of the reliability of that tool. So I'm pro, and what influenced my standing is because I'm still exploring and learning about all the new ones, but I also take into account what it means for me from an intellectual integrity perspective. So even you adding that disclaimer, before you start the presentation, that it's very critical because part of the reasons why we're having so many problems, people do not disclose to what extent they used it. And I like that now there are guiding protocols of how to disclose, even in publications as well, and to what extent you've used the tool.
Brilliant. But thank you so much for sharing that. That I think that sets the stage for us for the rest of our conversation this afternoon as well. And thank you also for being so honest in terms of wanting to explore, but obviously have those elements of caution as well, and the reasons for that. Colleagues, the reason why I've shared this case study with you is that I would like you to hang on to that, because I'm going to come back to that at the end of our session this afternoon. But for me, this case study is a typical day in our work in some form or another, whether we work in an office, whether we work with colleagues or students, or whether we teach or do research. We are confronted with many of these tools and how and when and if to use them as well. So the focus of this masterclass this afternoon is actually to start to explore our own personal and institutional responses also a bit further. And what I mean by that is that we start to interrogate what it reveals actually about our own underlying beliefs, about research, about methodology as well, and of course also about technological innovation. So colleagues, the way in which we want to get started is I would like us to just to pause for a minute and to reflect on our current higher education landscape and also its responses since the launch of ChatGPT in November 2022. 30 November, it will actually be exactly 2 years since OpenAI launched ChatGPT. And the initial growth, I've shared this yesterday in another workshop that I presented. ChatGPT actually gained 1 million users within the first 5 days of its launch. And by January 2023, it actually became one of the fastest growing consumer software applications in history, gaining over 100 million users in 2 months. So the speed, the acceleration, and the environment that we're currently working in, it's just accelerating at an unprecedented pace that we haven't experienced with previous digital technologies. And what is clear in terms of this is obviously that higher education, as we all know, experienced significant shifts and discussions about Gen AI. And you'll see on the slide here that those are some of the broader topics that many of us engaged with and are still engaging with. For instance, coming back to the colleague that shared with us her experiences in the case study, one of the first things that we talked about is academic integrity and, of course, also assessment redesign. And there are still widespread discussions about preventing AI-assisted cheating. Many institutions, including our own, are developing either policies or guidelines for AI use in assignments and research practices as well. And we're even talking about things such as the emergence of AI-proof type of assignments that require more critical thinking or personal reflection or original analysis. So I think that was the tipping point for us in our education, that we immediately had to respond to those issues after the release of ChatGPT. Subsequently, of course, it had an impact on our teaching and learning practices as well. Talking about pedagogical innovation, we started to explore the ways in which Gen AI could be used as a sensible learning tool. And also then, of course, parallel to that, we started to think about AI literacy programs for students, staff members, etc. In addition to that, in terms of research and the work that we're doing, of course, what we found was obviously that there is a surge in academic publications examining Gen AI's impact on our education. There's a lot of interdisciplinary research that's taking place. I'm also involved in 1 or 2 projects in terms of that. And we're starting to increasingly focus on AI's potential to transform learning, teaching methodologies, and of course, assessment practices. Many of us are comfortable already in the fact that we start to use Gen AI tools for certain aspects of research practices, such as ideation, lit reviews, and also data analysis. So these type of things, all of these things started to evolve, especially the past 2 years as well. Our institutions, in terms of technological infrastructure and policy, as I've mentioned, there's the creation of AI governance committees that's been established in institutions. We're starting to look at comprehensive AI usage policies, and it's one of the things I very often see it as one of our safety blankets. We all need some form of a guideline in how to deal with these tools and the implications as well. Of course, there are discussions about intellectual property rights and also the generation of AI-generated content as well. And then on the left-hand side of the slide, as you can see, many ethical considerations as well, even philosophical discussions that we're starting to have. We have questions about AI's impact on learning and intellectual development, for instance. many conversations that I participate in foreground the idea of a value-based approach to Gen AI, where we place the human as central within this engagement. And we all have concerns about algorithmic biases, data privacy, and of course, also the potential for AI to perpetuate existing inequalities. So that accessibility considerations on the left-hand side of the slide is something that many of us are also dealing with. And then, of course, last but not least, we also have conversations about the professional development for all staff members, the training programs, and we've all signed up. We are all here today. We're looking at workshops, ways of broadening our understanding and our knowledge about these tools and also the implications. So this in a nutshell, if we stand back and think of it, an awful lot had happened in the past 2 years since the release of the first large language model. The colleague's question that I have is, and what I believe is, what's evident from the previous slide that I shared with you is that in the wake of Gen AI's emergence, that higher education, by no fault of their own, by the way, adopted a reactive stance by constructing policies, revising, rethinking assessments, and implementing technological safeguards. And we all did that, and that was all that we could do at that stage as well. But in my opinion, I believe that these surface-level responses, in a sense, perhaps obscures a more profound epistemological challenge, and that is our inability, or even perhaps our unwillingness, to comprehend the fundamental transformations occurring in how knowledge is conceived and how knowledge is created and how knowledge is transmitted. And I want to argue that in our current engagement with Gen AI, it's often constrained by our very traditional or conventional or even historical understanding of learning. We have a paradigm that is rooted in linear knowledge acquisition. And it's a paradigm that's rooted in individual authorship or in a hierarchy of information transmission. So we are actually responding to a technological disruption through the very epistemological frameworks that these technologies are simultaneously challenging or even dismantling, in a sense. So how do we deal with this? None of us, or most certainly not myself, I'm not a scholar or an expert in terms of knowledge and the nature of knowledge, but there are certain things that I believe that we can start to do to actually delve deeper into our responses in relation to Gen AI. To generally navigate this evolving landscape, I believe that we must first actually start to excavate our own philosophical foundations. And that means that we will need to reflect on what does it mean when we speak about knowledge, and how do we define learning, for instance. And of course, these are not mere academic abstractions. They are actually critical integrations of what is revealed of our underlying assumptions, and that will be shaping our institutional, our pedagogical, and also our cognitive responses. In my opinion, the gap between technological potential and our current understanding is not necessarily the worry about the technological, but it's actually much more philosophical question that we need to address. I want to argue that we are reactive because we have not yet developed the conceptual infrastructure to comprehend an alternative mode of knowledge production, one that is perhaps much more collaborative, perhaps much more dynamic, and even more scarily, perhaps, increasingly unbounded by the traditional human-centric constraints. So for us to move forward, our challenge then is to develop what I call an epistemological literacy that allows us to understand our own cognitive positioning. And for me, this is what this masterclass this afternoon is all about. It's starting to uncover our own cognitive positioning, our current way of thinking about Gen AI. Now, there are many ways in which we can start to examine our cognitive positioning. And we can also call it our personal epistemology, if we want. Broadly spoken, personal epistemology actually explains how we think about knowledge, how it is created, and how we think we learn. Now, of course, this is a complex and a multidimensional construct that is influenced by our individual, but also, of course, our social or our lived experiences. It's not a one-dimensional thing, and it's complicated. And of course, what is also important to understand is that in this process, that we are all actively involved in this process of knowledge construction, and not merely in enacting what we've experienced in the world, but also engaging the process of seeking an equilibrium or practicality in terms of our experiences. And in other words, what that means, and I explained yesterday in workshop as well, is none of us sit on a daily basis and philosophize about knowledge, unless we are philosophy lecturers or in that field. And none of us think explicitly about learning or knowledge specifically. But we all have an opinion about that, because we all have knowledge and we all have an understanding of how we gain or develop knowledge. And the same goes for learning as well. And the moment if something happens that's disconnected to our understanding, that's when we start to aim for some form of equilibrium. That we want to try to form some form of a balance in order to justify our understanding and our responses and our actions. And that to me, colleagues, is in a sense also what it implies, that equilibrium that we seek to try and engage with in meaning making when we start to engage with Gen AI tools as well. We need to find some form of a balance in relation to our existing knowledge structures. But perhaps to make it more practical, let's see if we can look at, because it's very theoretical and abstract, what I've just said in the previous two slides. How do we make it more practical? I want to draw attention to a framework that's been developed by educational psychologist Schommer. And this framework was developed in 1994 already. So it's a fairly established framework. And Schommer actually argues that when we think about knowledge and when we think about learning, there are certain subsections that we can look at. And you'll see on the slide there, on the left-hand side, that you'll see that I speak about the source of knowledge, the stability of knowledge, the structure of knowledge, and then also the control of learning, as well as the speed of learning. So what I'll do just for the next minute or two is I'm just going to very briefly explain to you what each of these constructs mean, and I'm going to illustrate it by means of a very plain, practical, normal life example. All right, so I'm not going to relate it to Gen AI as example, just so that we can get an understanding of what Schommer actually meant when she divided and selected these subsections. Let's start with the source of knowledge. Now, the source of knowledge actually speaks to our understanding whether knowledge comes from authority or can it actually be constructed via reasoning. And let's give you a practical example. Say, for instance, my mobile phone, my smartphone isn't working. Well, I immediately take that phone to the Vodacom shop, to an expert there, to try to solve the problem. Well, I tried to solve the problem myself by looking up information and reasoning through possible solutions. So that at a very basic level means what we mean when we refer to the source of knowledge. Is it authority that will give us the knowledge, or is it that we can actually get that also by means of reasoning and additional information? So that's the first example of the source of knowledge. If we look at the stability of knowledge, this speaks about the fact whether knowledge is viewed as fixed or ever evolving. So let's take the medical environment as an example. What doctors knew about treating heart diseases 50 years ago is, of course, very different from what they know today. And some of the knowledge will remain the same. So our basic anatomy will remain the same. But other knowledge will actually evolve with new research. So that is what it's meant by when we refer to the stability of knowledge. Is it really embedded? It's one source, one space, or is it something that could actually evolve over time as well? All right, so that's what stability of knowledge means. The structure of knowledge is seen as whether knowledge is seen as isolated bits or integrated concepts. And I used the example yesterday as well as when we think of learning to cook, for instance. If you're a beginner cook, you will probably start by following an isolated recipe. A follows B follows C, or somebody that's an experienced cook will understand that these ingredients actually infuse each other and they work together. And based on that, we have a product at the end. So the structure of knowledge is actually, how do we perceive the structure? Is it isolated in terms of knowledge, or are they integrated concepts that forms our understanding of knowledge? In addition to that, the same goes for learning. Schommer argues that when we look at the control of learning, it's actually talking about our beliefs about our own learning ability. And I'll use the example of learning a new language. Some people might think that I'm just not good at languages, while others will believe that they can actually improve with practice and with the right learning strategies. So we have a different perception about the control of learning taking place. And then last but not least, in terms of the speed of learning, that speaks about the fact that whether we argue that learning happens quickly, or is it something that will happen gradually over time? And I use the example here of learning to drive a car. Can we master it in one day, or is it something that will happen over a prolonged period of time? Now, colleagues, why is this important that we have an understanding of these different epistemological dimensions? Schommer actually argued, she went a step further. Before I answer that question, she went a step further and said that in terms of these different subsections, we actually place ourselves on a continuum for each of these epistemological beliefs. And she distinguished between two groups. You'll see on the left-hand side the sophisticated or the developed or mature type of beliefs. And on the right-hand side, she refers to the naive or the underdeveloped or immature beliefs. Now, I said it yesterday as well. Personally, I don't like the headings there necessarily. For me, there's a value statement involved there. But what they actually argue, what the author argues here, is that we are all arranged along a spectrum. So either with sophisticated or then with underdeveloped or naive beliefs on the one extreme, and then obviously the sophisticated ones on the others. So obviously an individual that possesses sophisticated epistemological perspectives would hold contrasting viewpoints on mentioned aspects than those that are displaying naive beliefs. And of course, all of us will position ourselves at any point along this continuum, ranging from sophisticated beliefs to naive. So it's not a either or. it depends, and it depends on the topic, it depends on what we're talking about. But the reason why I'm sharing this with you is to demonstrate to you that all of us in this webinar this afternoon will be plotted absolutely differently on the different epistemological beliefs, and also in terms of whether it's sophisticated or naive, and on that continuum, which of course means that has an implication for our actions and our behaviors and also our perceptions. And therefore, colleagues, I believe that this belief system that's been highlighted by Schommer actually offers valuable insights into how individuals perceive knowledge and learning. And it could also provide us with a broad understanding of our own actions and perceptions related to Gen AI in our individual work environments. And I believe that our personal epistemological beliefs, if you think back to that continuum, manifests also into different paradigms that we can identify within ourselves, also that we can identify within our peers and even with the students that we are engaging with. So for the second part of this webinar, I would like to suggest and propose 7 different types of paradigms that could be potentially rooted in our own epistemological belief systems, and that these paradigms play out in different ways when we start to engage with Gen AI. And you'll see on the slide there that I've got 7 paradigms. I've got possibility-focused, pioneering, symbiotic, the augmented, the guarded, the ethical first, and also democratizing paradigm. And what I would like you to do is while I go through these 7 paradigms, I want to ask you to make a couple of notes on do you position yourself in terms of and aligning yourself with some of these paradigms. As I've stated previously as well, this hasn't been empirically tested. These are based on observations, anecdotal, and also conversations that I've had with many colleagues in the past 2 years. And then obviously closely aligned with my growing understanding of also epistemological belief systems. So colleagues, let's get started with the first one, which is the possibility-focused paradigm. Normally that users aligning themselves with this paradigm recognize and emphasize also Gen AI's capacity to facilitate the creation of new knowledge through innovative approaches to knowledge production that we perhaps have not had fully explored at this point in time. One could argue that with this school of thought, and this hasn't been completely interrogated yet, but it might be that we have some form of a balanced understanding of the nature of knowledge, acknowledging both its enduring and also its evolving aspects. It might even be that in terms of the complexity of knowledge, that we start to embrace both simple and intricate forms, while also, of course, valuing the diverse sources of knowledge creation, which include then Gen AI generated insights. In a practical sense, what does this perspective mean? And I'm going to share with you just some examples in terms of the possibility-focused paradigm. It might be that there's something here that speaks to you and your initial responses to Gen AI as well. Let's look at on the left-hand side of the slide at the scientific processes in general. We are all aware of the fact that the potential of intelligent machines that provide scientific insights has been a topic of discussion since the early days of AI. So it's not something completely new that we're engaging with. But then, of course, thanks to the recent development of large language models such as ChatGPT, there's been an increase in interest in the role of AI within, for instance, in research and research policy, and also, of course, in terms of being a facilitator of innovative methods and processes, etc. AI is generally perceived within the scientific process as beneficial for tasks such as information gathering, or other specific functions, as well as supporting us in interdisciplinarity. But what about the impact of writing? And I think there are many strong opinions about this as well. And these tools have been the subject of criticism, and also has been portrayed as a significant threat to science. But as you look at the work of Grillo there on the slide, the author actually argues that these tools can be immensely beneficial for authors or researchers who may struggle with writing in English, for instance. I've used the example in the past as well, is that the dominance of English in global publication poses translation challenges, and that over 95% of articles are being published in English, and it reaches as high as 98% in certain journals and certain fields. So we can imagine that just to have a tool that could assist us just in partially translating some of our academic work could be to the advantage of many researchers that come from non-native English regions. Perhaps a more controversial one is also the literature and the peer review process as we submit articles or journals, publications for journals. The argument is that automation is beneficial for assisting in the identification of reviewers, and there's also already substantial evidence indicating that it can occasionally also aid in the initial quality control of submitted manuscripts. But there is, of course, a note of caution, specifically also in this area. Although there is a lot of potential, there's not yet sufficient research in terms of this area specifically. But colleagues, what I tried to do here was to demonstrate to you some examples, some nuggets of examples of somebody that will probably align him or herself or themselves to a possibility-focused paradigm. So that's the first paradigm that I wanted to share with you. The next one is the pioneering paradigm. Now, the pioneering paradigm is a paradigm that offers perhaps us the opportunity to dream or to philosophize or even to embrace change with some form of a belief that growth and new opportunities contribute to knowledge and to learning. It might be that people that align with this paradigm view knowledge as relativist by recognizing also its inherent uncertainty and also its fluidity. It might even be that they view Gen AI as a valuable tool to venture beyond the limitations of traditional practices and understanding. Users that closely align with the pioneering paradigm could, for instance, employ Gen AI to explore hypothetical scenarios by pushing the boundaries of our existing knowledge and our understanding. And practically what it means in terms of research practices, it means that Gen AI utilizes innovative interpretations of data, for instance. And it might also mean that we get new insights from AI-human collaboration. An example of also pioneering, and what I mean by pioneering are the new things, changes that took place within the past 2 years. And one of them is the fact that we also look at AI ethics much more closely. Now, there's a journal on AI ethics, and it's been there for many years, so that's not completely new. But of course, now with the release of ChatGPT, all of us are suddenly interested in the impact of AI and also the ethical implications. It's an interesting publication by Hannah and Kazim, where the authors actually argue that one of the key points of criticism about AI ethics is its lack of philosophical underpinnings. And they argue, and this is where the pioneering umbrella for me comes in, is that they say it paves the way for us to consider what such ethical considerations then should entail. So the authors give a list of things that one could consider, and we don't have time to go through all of these. And these are very, very much philosophical questions to ask. Things such, for instance, that we need to remind ourselves about our own moral obligations in respect of all human beings. Things such as what privacy means, specifically nowadays, also then in the digital sphere. So these are broad and very important conversations that we cannot solve in one or two webinars. But for me, this is part of the pioneering flavor, or the pioneering the pioneering flavor of this paradigm is the fact that it's new and that we're working towards change and we're thinking about new aspects as well. Another example in terms of the pioneering paradigm is the reference to AI literacy. And all of us have heard about AI literacies. We call it digital literacy, AI literacy, critical AI literacy. There are many terms, there are many frameworks, and they are very similar and also very different. But for me, some of the key pointers in terms of, and which is new and pioneering, is that suddenly most of us need to have a basic understanding, at least about the basic architecture of these tools, which we didn't need to have with any of the release of any of the other digital tools that we used in the past. We need to understand this in order to further understand the subsequent implications of these tools. And similarly, we need to understand the affordances, what these tools can and cannot do. And that could range from anything from AI that could be biased based on human-based data, to the point that it might be that AI could even invent inaccurate information as well. So we are, if you think about that and you think back 2 years back where you were and where we are now, in terms of your knowledge, I'll guarantee you that all of us grew exponentially in some form or another in terms of our reference to Gen AI specifically. And of course, for me, one of the most pioneering aspects is the fact that we are able now to communicate with machines. And I'm referring to the normal person. I'm not talking about computer scientists. I'm talking about that somebody that could actually communicate with a screen in front of them. And that is, of course, called prompt engineering or prompt crafting as well. Where in the past, when we communicated, it was Web 2.0. It was basically responding to social media posts or then to a blog, for instance. And nowadays, we actually can start to have some form of a conversation with the machine as well. So for me, that is absolutely a characteristic of a pioneering paradigm. The next paradigm is a rather controversial one, and this is the symbiotic paradigm. For me, it's actually very intriguing, and it's also intriguing to listen to people when we have a conversation about this paradigm. In this paradigm, we reimagine and re-examine the relationship between humans and between machines. In this perspective, we propose a symbiotic relationship where Gen AI is viewed as a partner in the process of knowledge creation. And this paradigm is the one that is completely contrasting to the other suggested paradigms that prioritize humans as central to the human-Gen AI relationship. Within this particular framework, emphasis is placed on the synergy between human and machine. And it is acknowledged that both constructs actually impact and enhance each other's capabilities. And we had a very interesting conversation yesterday. Somebody said, but shouldn't we say it's a parasite, that the one is drawing much stronger on the other? And then the questions came out, but is it only the human benefiting, or could it be that the machine is also benefiting from us sharing some of our thoughts, our creativity, our data at the end of the day? Within this school of thought, users can explore collaborative tasks between humans and machines, understanding design principles, and can successfully utilize these tools to complement human intelligence. In order to colleagues to embrace such a paradigm, one could, for instance, look in terms of research. One could look at the benefits of AI in research, and we could adopt a type of a multifaceted approach. And this could involve the ethical integration of AI tools, the integration of digital and AI literacy, and also the promotion of collaborative efforts between human users and then, of course, also AI systems. We don't have time to go through all of those studies on the left-hand side, but do have a look. Those are also all examples of where colleagues actually argue that there is potential for us to actually form some form of a symbiotic paradigm, depending on certain aspects that safeguards that need to be put in place as well. But it's all here about the balance between what we bring as humans to this engagement and what we can draw on from the technical side of things as well. The augmented paradigm is maybe the one that I'm not going to spend a lot of time on. And I think this is one of the schools of thought that many of us are perhaps more comfortable in. In this school of thought, we posit that Gen AI can actually significantly enhance our human capabilities by augmenting it, but not replacing our traditional methods of knowledge production. So it advocates for a paradigm where Gen AI serves as a tool to enhance and extend our human abilities, but not to substitute them. And this type of paradigm or perspective is very often grounded in cognitive science and emphasizes the creative application of Gen AI to augment existing human capabilities. And we all have examples of that. I'm sure that all of us will be able to draw on at least one example where we've used Gen AI to accelerate tasks for us, to foster, to think of creative ideas, or to assist in problem solving, some form or another. So that is the augmented paradigm. So colleagues, we've got 3 paradigms left. This one is also one which I think is fairly familiar for many of us, and this is the guarded paradigm. Now, individuals who exhibit caution and a slower pace in adopting Gen AI are often associated with a more critical evaluation of these tools and their applications. And these individuals very often argue for actions that require more critical evaluation of these tools. And if we think about our recent engagements with Gen AI in higher education and all the questions globally around assessment practices and academic integrity, the guarded paradigm was evident in many of the publications, discussions, and of course also commentary that most of us engaged with. Of course, within this paradigm, questions arise about authorship, about integrity, and the potential consequences for academia, and then, of course, also for student learning. And those aligned with this school of thought will typically advocate for a cautious and a systematic and controlled adoption of Gen AI. And we tend to focus on the associated risks and assessments, issues of security, and of course also the responsible and the ethical use of these tools and these systems. On our slide, once again, it is a study that I'm not going to spend some time on now. It's work done by Wang and Singh, where they actually, this is just an example of a guarded paradigm. And I think we will all be able to immediately identify a number of studies which is very closely aligned with the guarded paradigm. So colleagues, to move towards the second last paradigm is the ethical first paradigm. In this paradigm, we prioritize ethical considerations and also a value-based approach. We emphasize the ethical use of these tools and, of course, also the moral responsibilities associated with the implications for the academic project. We prioritize the development of literacies and competencies that enhance our understanding of ethical principles such as fairness, transparency, and also accountability. And our engagements, those of us that closely align with this paradigm, we will also very typically also focus on issues of AI governance and the development of ethical usage frameworks. Just an example here, once again, the work by Hickok Merv Hickok actually worked very closely on also looking at ethics. And you'll see that the author here actually divided it up into 3 parts. And I'm not going to go into detail here, but the one thing that they did mention was the fact that one of the point of criticisms for those of us aligning ourselves with the ethical paradigm is that very often it becomes too theoretical and too impractical, and that it very often reflects the values of a limited group of experts. Based on that, we actually lack community engagement, and that we actually need to focus much more on inclusive practices to ensure justice and also representation. And then, of course, the elephant in the room, so on the right-hand side, is the impact and the influence of large corporations, and that the authors argue that there should be much more closer examination of the influence of these corporations on the use and the implications of Gen AI tools. Colleagues, our last but not least paradigm is the democratizing paradigm. Now, this school of thought posits that Gen AI provides new pathways to education and knowledge access, especially in decision-making processes. It also advocates for inclusive and equitable educational experiences for all. You'll see now what I mean is that this school of thought actually has got 2 sides to it. The paradigm believes that Gen AI can contribute to the empowerment of individuals and the broader society, and that they place emphasis on the equitable distribution of knowledge and access also to these tools. But it also raises questions about power and ideology. The rapid advancements in AI have led to the development of incredibly powerful capabilities and widespread applications that have become embedded in our daily lives. This increasing power raise profound moral, social, and of course, economic questions as well. And these questions actually strike at the heart of our future, touch on issues such as the nature of human work in an AI-driven work environment. It speaks about privacy protection, the preservation of human freedom, for instance, as well, and how do we ensure fairness and transparency in algorithmic decision-making. But it goes further than that. When we employ AI properly, of course, it could create a lot of benefits for mankind. However, we are often not told about AI's role in also intensifying societal problems such as discrimination, technological unemployment, and of course, as I've mentioned in the previous slide, the dominance of large corporations. And one of the things that many of us believe is that data, the foundation upon which AI systems operate, is an impartial and, of course, a timeless entity, which is devoid of any values or biases. And these beliefs extend to the perception of technology being in itself also an objective medium, and suggesting that AI as a technological solution functions based on unbiased, factual, and also clinical processes. However, for those of us that's worked in this field as well, and when we start to delve deeper into the history of technology, it becomes evident that throughout human history, technology has always been very much linked to specific cultures and values and beliefs, biases, religions, and also gender perspectives. So in other words, technology is political and it is never neutral. So AI, as all other technologies, are fallible and not void of ideology and power and of mistakes. So colleagues, those are the 7 paradigms. And just bringing you back to where we are, we're moving towards the end of the session. We started off with a case study. And it was a case study just to try to start to position ourselves in terms of what our initial responses are, in terms of a typical day at work when somebody decides to engage and to use Gen AI. I started off by looking at higher education and our responses after the release of Gen AI, and I argued that one of the gaps there is that we very often have a surface level reactive response, which is logical and natural, but that there's a gap and that we need to also start to look at our own cognitive positioning. And the way in which we can look at our own cognitive positions is actually to start to understand the idea of knowledge and idea of learning a bit better. The way in which I suggested that was by means of the framework by Schommer, where we said that there are actually 5 different dimensions that we can look at, and we can place that on a continuum. I then concluded that based on that, all of us will obviously have different perceptions about learning and also about knowledge, and that will then obviously also manifest differently when we engage with something such as Gen AI. And that is how I came about with the suggestion of these 7 different paradigms. And now to conclude, the question is, of course, the so what? So what if we have different cognitive positions? And so what if we have different paradigms or different frameworks that we align ourselves with at this stage? Maybe the real challenge lies in recognizing that how these paradigms can also inadvertently become barriers to meaningful engagement. And I'm not going to go through all of them on this slide, but I'm just going to give 1 or 2 examples. So, for instance, if we look at pedagogical resistance, if I have a guarded paradigm, it might, for instance, I'm not saying it is, but it might lead to me as a lecturer to put in place overtly restrictive policies that prevent students from developing critical AI literacies. It might be that I place a blanket ban on AI tools and assignments, and that could be used for an additional learning opportunity for critical analysis and for ethical reasoning. It might, for instance, mean that if we look at research and innovation constraints, if we align ourselves with paradigms that are rooted in linear knowledge production, it might potentially be that we limit interdisciplinary and AI-augmented research approaches. It might be that there's a hesitation to explore AI as a collaborative research tool, and it might even be that we miss opportunities for innovative knowledge creation, in a sense. So, colleagues, what I'm trying to say is that there's absolutely nothing wrong with where we align ourselves, and that's part of human nature and part of being who we are as unique individuals and as humans, and it should be like that. But perhaps this is also an opportunity to just to pause and to reflect on our own cognitive positions and what those implications could be for further engagements with these tools. So our diverse paradigms of engagement with Gen AI, in my opinion, actually ultimately is a manifestation of our deeply ingrained personal epistemological beliefs. And as I said earlier as well, I don't think it's merely theoretical constructs, but these are lived cognitive frameworks that fundamentally shape our interactions with these radical and transformative and emerging technologies. So for me, the real challenge lies in recognizing how these paradigms can potentially also become barriers to meaningful future engagement. However, within this complexity lies our most profound opportunity, and that is to transform these barriers into bridges of understanding. Perhaps by cultivating and exploring epistemological literacy, we can begin at the baby steps to start to reimagine our relationship with technology. Maybe not as a threat to be managed, but perhaps even as a collaborative landscape of human potential. And I want to conclude by saying that our collective wisdom, that what makes us, all of us, truly human, lies not in resisting change, but in our capacity to actually to evolve, to adapt, and to expand our understanding of what it means to learn and to create and also to know. So thank you so much for your attention, colleagues. I do appreciate it. Francois, over to you. I don't if there are any questions from the floor.
Thank you very much, Sonja. Luther and I, just going to have a look at the chat. Luther, can you maybe just bring up some of the questions that was asked so that we can engage with Dr. Strydom there?
Okay, I'm not sure. Most people hadn't started typing out questions, but I have a question, just a personal question right here. Interesting presentation, by the way.
Thank you.
So I just wanted to find out, regarding this whole conversation on AI and, the interaction between AI and humans. So does the development of AI challenge our concept of self and personal identity? Because, if AI can now mimic human behavior and thought, so what does that say about the uniqueness of individual consciousness? Just putting it out there.
It's a very interesting question, and I think that's a question for much more clever people than me. But it is a question in terms of, and I think that is what many of the conversations that I'm currently engaging with are also questions about the broader philosophical and the psychological questions that we have about what does it truly mean to be human? What does human intelligence mean? How does it differ? Can it actually happen that a machine can mimic aspects of being human, and to what extent, if that's the answer? So to answer your question, is I think it's for me, this presentation and this thought process is more about starting to reflect on these types of questions. And that's why I started off with arguing that we were very much in a reactive mode when Gen AI was released. And that is absolutely correct. All of us, that's the only thing that we could do. But I think there's a time and space now, after 2 years, that we need to start to think about these broader philosophical questions and start to engage with them as well. And also start to wonder what will the implications be for us in terms of our future endeavors and engagement with these tools.
Okay, nice one. And just to catch on what you do about the future, right? I was having a conversation with a colleague earlier on, and then this came up where we started debating whether the integration of AI is a natural next step for human evolution, or are we actually moving away from it?
Well, that is a very interesting question. And I think I don't have the answer to that. Let's immediately put that way. I think it depends on at what level you look at it. What we do find at this stage is obviously the ubiquitous nature of Gen AI, and what that means is that it's all around us. So for me, it feels at this point in time that it's infiltrating and integrating many of the spheres that we live and work in, socially as well, etc. But to me, that's not necessarily all of it negative. It means that we need to pause and we need to reflect on the broader applications and implications as well.
Okay, thank you for that. And we now have a question from Peter. So Peter is asking, with AI now in place, what does it mean to 1, know, 2, teach, and 3, learn?
Peter, I think that is the $1 million question. And I think that is the whole conversation and my first attempt in trying to clarify it for myself in terms of understanding knowledge. We had a very interesting conversation yesterday in a workshop where the argument was that there was a question about our conventional or our traditional way of knowing or how we understand it. And then a computer scientist actually made the comment and said, but maybe we are approaching this totally in a wrong way. We need to think differently about knowing. My question then is, but what are the questions that I need to ask, which I don't know at this stage myself? And I think that is where many of us are, is that that we're in a landscape that's evolving rapidly, but it means that we need to start to think differently about constructs that perhaps we haven't done in the past as well. And that would go for subsequently also then the way in which we teach, and of course also the way in which we believe learning takes place as well.
Okay, thank you for that. Thank you for that. And since I don't see any other questions, I don't think there's harm in one more. I'll just give you one more from my end. You spoke a lot about ethics, and that's a very hot issue when it comes to AI. So I was wondering, we know that there's been discussions of, AI potentially causing harm, right? So now the question is, when this actually does happen, where does the moral responsibility lie? Is it going to be the developers, users, or AI itself?
That's a very good question, Luther, and that I think that is one of the biggest questions that all of us have as well. It's there's a space that we can still control in our immediate environment, but there is a space that is outside of our control, and that is where we speak to, and that's the level that the normal person doesn't have knowledge and access to. And then that becomes a moral question about where does the responsibility lie in terms of that? What's the role and the implication of large corporations in terms of this? And that becomes a totally different topic as well. So I'm afraid I can't give you an answer in terms of that. A very simplistic answer is obviously to try to be as ethical and as transparent as possible as individuals. But of course, the implications are far-reaching and much broader than what we have on a daily basis in terms of this engagement.
Okay, I agree. We have another question from Jane. So Jane is asking, what is the possibility of redefining plagiarism and academic integrity in relation to the various epistemological nuances? How may academia redefine plagiarism with a plethora of information and tech?
Wow, that's a very good question, and I think it speaks to my opening section that I had in my slides about the fact that perhaps it's time for us to rethink and to reconsider and to interrogate our current understanding of things. And of course, that means that plagiarism or academic integrity, that what we hold dear to us and what's been established for so long, is it still appropriate to draw on that? And that comes back to the question that we had in the conversation that we had yesterday as well, is shouldn't we start to push the boundaries and start to ask these existential, in a sense, existential questions as well, but also the very practical questions, and and maybe this is an opportunity for us to start to reflect. But for me, maybe what I will say as a concluding comment is, for me, in order to be able to engage with these conversations, I need to know where I am placed at this point in time. Hence the start of presentation that I shared with you. Thank you.
Hey, thank you for that. We have another question from Grace. The questions seem to be rolling in. How do you ensure that openly allowing students to use the tools in higher education reduces plagiarism?
I don't know, to be honest with you. I think we know by now that tools such as Turnitin it's not AI proof. So once again, coming back to what I said, it's maybe a time also to rethink then the way in which we design assessments, or how we think about assessments or assignments, and also how do we manage that then as well. Also in terms of not only the expectations, but also then jointly with our students in that process as well.
Hey, thank you for that. I don't see any questions on my end. I don't know about you, Francois.
I think if there's no more questions, then on behalf of the African Doctoral Academy, I would just like to say thank you very much, Dr. Sonja Strydom. for presenting today. It's an absolute pleasure to always listen to the work that you do on AI. And
Thank you.
I think, I think the angle that you take on AI in these sessions are always really thought-provoking and keeps us talking for days. I think people like to always jump straight into the practical side of AI and the the apps but we never think about these things. So we look forward to hearing more of you in the future.
Thank you, Francois. Thank you. Yeah, colleagues, thank you for the invitation. I really appreciate it.
Thanks very much.
And then,
everybody else.
And then for the attendees here today, I would just like to say thank you very much for joining us. And we'd like to invite you for future webinars and masterclasses like these. We have a newsletter that you can sign up for. There's a YouTube page on which this class and all the previous ones are also made available on. And I think Luther can post all of those links for us in the chat as well. And then in addition, I would just like to mention that we have a summer school that's running in January. I'd really like to invite all of you to go and have a look on our website. We also have an advertisement which we can post in the chat. The applications does close in December, so please make sure that you have a look at it soon. All right. Thank you very much. Natalie, over to you.
Thanks very much, Francois. And again, a big thank you to Dr. Sonja Strydom and everybody that's joined. Just a big thank you to Francois as well as Luther for the excellent job today. And we look forward to welcoming everybody next year to another 2025 Masterclass webinar. So thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye, everyone.